The doorbell rang at 6:30 in the morning, jolting me from a fitful sleep. I hadn't been expecting anyone, especially not at this ungodly hour. My bones creaked as I slipped on my robe and shuffled to the front door of the home I'd lived in for 47 years. Through the peephole, I saw my grandson Michael's face, wearing that particular smile that always appeared when he wanted something. "Grandma Eleanor," he exclaimed as I opened the door, his voice too loud for the early hour. "You look wonderful." I knew I didn't. At 78, with my silver hair uncombed and sleep still in my eyes, wonderful was far from accurate. But Michael had always been liberal with flattery when it suited his purposes. "Michael," I said, tightening my robe, "it's not even 7 in the morning." "I know, I know. I'm sorry." He wasn't. "I have an early meeting downtown, but I wanted to stop by first. May I come in?" I stepped aside, watching as he strode into my living room with the confidence of youth and privilege. At 32, Michael had his father's height and his mother's charm, both of which he'd leveraged into a moderately successful real estate career. What he lacked was his grandfather's integrity. "Coffee?" I offered, already moving toward the kitchen. "That would be great, Grandma, and maybe we could talk about something important while we have it." There it was. I'd raised 3 children and helped raise 5 grandchildren. I knew the sound of an agenda. The coffee maker gurgled as Michael settled at my kitchen table, his expensive watch glinting under the light. I'd bought him that watch for his 30th birthday. $25,000 from the money Harold and I had saved over 50 years of marriage. Harold would have said it was too extravagant, but after his death 3 years ago, I'd found myself more generous with family, perhaps trying to fill the emptiness with their happiness. "So," I said, placing a steaming mug before him, "what's this important matter that couldn't wait until a decent hour?" Michael took a sip, then set the mug down carefully. "I've been worried about you, Grandma." "Have you now?" I eased into the chair across from him, my arthritis making itself known. "Yes. Living alone in this big house, it's not safe. What if you fall? What if there's an emergency?" I'd had this conversation before with my daughter Jennifer, with my son Robert, even with my doctor, but never with Michael, who had shown little interest in my welfare until recently. Specifically, until Harold's will had been read, revealing that I was the sole beneficiary of his considerable estate, including the house, investments, and the proceeds of a substantial life insurance policy. "I managed just fine," I said, blowing on my coffee. "Mrs. Abernathy next door checks on me daily, and I have my medical alert button." I tapped the device hanging around my neck. "And the house isn't that big." "But it's valuable," Michael said, a bit too quickly. "I mean, it's valuable to you, emotionally. All those memories." I nodded slowly. Yes, 47 years of memories. But maintaining it must be exhausting. The yard, the cleaning, the repairs. I have services for those things. Services I could well afford, thanks to Harold's prudent financial planning and his career as a bank executive. We'd never been flashy with our wealth, preferring to live comfortably but modestly, investing the rest for our future and eventually our family's future. It's like a resort for seniors. Activities, medical staff on site, new friends your age. I set my coffee down. A nursing home. "No, no," Michael said quickly. "It's independent living. You'd have your own apartment, but with all the support you need." "I have all the support I need here. But wouldn't it be nice to not worry about anything? To have meals prepared, housekeeping done, transportation provided." I studied my grandson's face. The same face that had looked up at me with chocolate-smeared cheeks when he was 5, the face I'd watched graduate from college, the face that now rarely appeared unless there was something to be gained. "Michael, why this sudden concern for my living arrangements?" He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I just want what's best for you. And you believe what's best for me is to leave my home. I think what's best is for you to be safe and cared for, and, he hesitated, the house is really too valuable to just sit here. Property taxes alone must be killing you. There it was, the house. My home sat on 2 acres in what had become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. When Harold and I bought it in 1975, it had been a modest investment in a developing area. Now it was worth well over $2 million. My finances are quite secure, I said. Harold made sure of that. Of course he did, Michael said quickly. But why not convert that equity into something that benefits you now? The sale of this house could fund decades in the most luxurious retirement community, with plenty left over. Left over for whom, I wondered. I've actually taken the liberty of scheduling a tour at Golden Sunset Acres for tomorrow, he continued. Just to look, no pressure. I felt a flicker of anger but tamped it down. That's very presumptuous of you. It's just a tour, Grandma. What's the harm in looking? The harm was in the assumption, in the gradual erosion of my independence, in the thinly veiled interest in my assets rather than my welfare. But I'd learned over 78 years that direct confrontation rarely yielded the truth. Sometimes, you had to give people enough rope to hang themselves. Fine, I said. What time tomorrow? Are you sure? It's across town and… I've been driving for 60 years, Michael. I think I can manage to follow your car. And Grandma, I really am just trying to help. I smiled tightly. I know you are. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, my coffee growing cold. The house creaked and settled around me, a familiar symphony of sounds. Harold and I had raised our children here. We'd celebrated birthdays, weathered illnesses, mourned losses, and marked countless ordinary days that, strung together, formed a life. The phone rang, pulling me from my reverie. It was my daughter, Jennifer. Mom? Did Michael stop by this morning? Yes, just left, I said. How did you know? There was a pause. He mentioned he might. What did he want? To take me on a tour of a retirement community, Golden something. Golden Sunset Acres, Jennifer's voice sharpened. Mom, please tell me you're not considering moving. I told him I'd look. No harm in looking. I sighed. Jennifer, what's going on? Another pause, longer this time. Michael's in financial trouble, bad investments, living beyond his means. He's been talking to Robert and me about how wasteful it is for you to stay in that house alone, how the family wealth should be properly managed. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I see. Do you? Because he's not just suggesting you downsize, Mom. He's been talking to a lawyer about how to establish conservatorship if you show any signs of being unable to manage your affairs. The coldness spread. He's looking to have me declared incompetent? Not yet, but he's laying groundwork. The sudden concern about you living alone, suggestions that you might not be safe or capable. It's all part of building a case. I thought of Michael's expensive watch, his tailored suit, the new luxury car in my driveway, all while he was apparently in financial trouble. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. Mom, don't go to that retirement home tomorrow. It'll just encourage him. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a cardigan set that had seen better days and deliberately scuffed loafers. I mussed my hair slightly and applied my makeup with a less steady hand than usual, ensuring a slightly unkempt appearance. Nothing dramatic, just enough to suggest a woman who might be beginning to struggle with self-care. Michael arrived promptly at 11, his face registering a flicker of approval at my disheveled state. Ready for our tour? He asked, offering his arm as if I might topple over without support. Yes, I said, taking it and allowing a slight tremor in my hand. Though I'm not sure why we need to look at these places. I'm perfectly fine here. Of course you are, he soothed, leading me to his car. This is just an option to consider, no decisions today. Golden Sunset Acres was exactly as I'd expected. A sprawling complex of identical beige buildings with well-manicured grounds and a lobby that tried too hard to look like a luxury hotel. The sales director, a woman named Brenda with an aggressively bright smile, greeted us effusively. Mrs. Harrington, we're so delighted to meet you. Your grandson has told us so much about you. I glanced at Michael. Has he? How interesting, since he knows so little about what I want. Brenda's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered. Well, we're excited to show you everything Golden Sunset has to offer. Shall we start with our amenities? For the next hour, we toured the facility. The dining room with its institutional food disguised under fancy names. The activity room where elderly residents worked on jigsaw puzzles under fluorescent lights. The tiny apartments with their emergency pull cords and grab bars. Throughout it all, Michael kept a running commentary. See how convenient everything is, Grandma? No stairs to worry about. Look at all these people your age to socialize with. Imagine not having to cook for yourself anymore. I nodded and smiled and played my part, occasionally forgetting a name or looking confused about a detail, just enough to feed Michael's narrative without overplaying my hand. Finally, we ended up in Brenda's office, where she presented a glossy brochure of pricing options. Our entry fee begins at $300,000, she explained, with monthly fees starting at $4,000 depending on the level of care needed. That seems reasonable, Michael said quickly. For what? I asked, injecting a note of genuine outrage into my voice. $300,000 to live in a glorified hotel room? It's not just the room, Mrs. Harrington, Brenda explained patiently. It's the security, the community, the care. Care I don't need, I pointed out. Not yet, Michael said, his voice gentle but patronizing. But it's better to move while you're still independent, rather than waiting for a crisis. I narrowed my eyes at him. And what happens to my house in this scenario? Well, he said, shifting slightly. Obviously we'd sell it. The proceeds would more than cover the entry fee and give you a substantial nest egg. And who would handle this sale and the nest egg? I could help with that, he offered, too quickly. To save you the stress. How thoughtful, I murmured. Brenda, sensing a sale, leaned forward. We do have a lovely one-bedroom unit available next month. Shall I put a hold on it for you? Before Michael could answer for me, I stood up. No, thank you. I think I've seen enough. Grandma, Michael started. Don't be hasty. We should discuss. Yes, we should discuss, I agreed, but not here. The drive home was tense, with Michael alternating between concerned questions about what I didn't like and assurances that there were other facilities we could tour. When we arrived back at my house, I invited him in with a decisiveness that seemed to surprise him. Michael, I said once we were seated in the living room, how much trouble are you in? His face registered shock, then quickly composed itself. What do you mean? Financially, how bad is it? He laughed, a forced sound. Grandma, I'm fine. This isn't about me. It's about what's best for you. Is it? Because Jennifer tells me you've been discussing the family wealth and how it should be properly managed. His expression hardened. Jennifer should mind her own business. This is her business. It's her mother you're trying to pack away. I'm not, he began, then stopped, recalibrating. Look, I'm just trying to be practical. This house is worth a fortune, and you're rattling around in it alone. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense to me. This is my home. But the money tied up in it could be working for you, for all of us. There it was. All of us? Michael leaned forward, dropping the concerned grandson act. Grandma, let's be realistic. You're 78. How many more years will you need this house? Meanwhile, I'm trying to expand my business. Robert's kids need college funds. There are better uses for $2 million than maintaining an outdated house for one elderly woman. I felt a curious calm settle over me. This wasn't a surprise, not really. I'd seen the signs, the increasing frequency of Michael's visits after Harold died, always with casual questions about my finances, suggestions about helping me manage my affairs. I see, I said quietly. And this concern about my safety living alone? The suggestion that I might not be competent to manage my own affairs. Michael had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not. I mean, living alone at your age is a legitimate concern. Is it? Or is it groundwork for having me declared incompetent if I refuse to hand over my assets? Grandma, that's paranoid. I would never. Wouldn't you? Jennifer tells me you've been speaking with a lawyer about conservatorship. His face flushed. She had no right to tell you that. She had every right. I'm her mother. And apparently, I'm your meal ticket. Michael stood up, agitated. You're twisting everything. I'm trying to help you. And yes, I think the family wealth should benefit the family while you're alive to see it, not just be parceled out after you're gone. The family wealth, as you call it, is my wealth, mine and Harold's. We worked for 50 years to build it. We sacrificed, we saved, we invested wisely. Not so you could squander it on bad investments and a lifestyle you haven't earned. I'm not asking for handouts, he protested. I'm asking for sensible financial planning that benefits everyone. Everyone meaning you. Meaning all of us. Why should millions sit idle when it could be growing, building something for the future? I studied my grandson, seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time. The entitlement, the calculation, the assumption that he had any right to wealth he hadn't created. Michael, I said finally, I think you should leave now. Grandma. Now please, I need to rest. It's been a trying day. He hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Fine. But this conversation isn't over. You need to think practically about your future. Oh, I intend to, I assured him. After he left, I sat in Harold's old armchair, running my fingers over the worn fabric. Well, Harold, I said to the empty room, it seems our grandson takes after my side of the family after all. My brother always did think he was entitled to everyone else's hard work. I picked up the phone and dialed Jennifer's number. How did it go? She asked immediately. About as expected. He showed his hand. I'm sorry, Mom. Don't be. Better to know where I stand. I took a deep breath. Can you come over tomorrow? Bring Robert if he's available. We need to talk about some changes I'm going to make. Changes? Mom, you're not considering moving, are you? The next morning, I called my lawyer, Thomas Abernathy, who had been handling our affairs since Harold and I wrote our first will 40 years ago. At 82, Thomas was still sharp as a tack and came to the house that afternoon. Eleanor, he greeted me warmly, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. Jennifer called. She's concerned. With good reason, I replied, and explained Michael's thinly veiled attempt to access my assets. Thomas's bushy eyebrows drew together as I spoke. When I finished, he nodded gravely. Unfortunately, I've seen this scenario play out many times. Adult children or grandchildren who view an elderly relative's assets as their inheritance in waiting. What are my options, Thomas? He opened his briefcase. Several. First, we can update your will to specifically address your concerns about Michael. Second, we can establish a trust that provides you with income while protecting the principal. And third, he paused. We can consider more creative solutions if you're interested in sending a stronger message. I leaned forward. I'm listening. As Thomas outlined a plan, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt a sense of purpose, of righteous indignation that energized me more than anything had in years. By the time Jennifer and Robert arrived that evening, I had made my decision. "Mom, we're worried," Jennifer said as soon as she walked in. "Robert told me Michael's been talking to their cousins about your declining capacity and how someone needs to step in." Robert, my serious, steady son who had always been the peacemaker, nodded grimly. "He's laying groundwork, Mom. I think he genuinely believes he's entitled to make decisions about your money." "Well," I said, pouring them each a cup of tea, "he's about to learn otherwise." I explained the plan Thomas and I had devised. As I spoke, Jennifer's eyes widened and Robert's expression shifted from concern to reluctant admiration. "Mom, that's drastic," Jennifer said finally. "Is it? More drastic than my grandson trying to have me declared incompetent to access my money?" "He'll be furious," Robert warned. "Good," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "Let him be furious. Let him understand that actions have consequences." Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this?" I thought of Harold, of our life together, of the legacy we had hoped to leave. Not just money, but values, integrity, respect, things Michael seemed to have forgotten. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time Michael learned that my wealth comes with my wisdom. And right now, my wisdom is telling me he needs a lesson more than he needs an inheritance." The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since Harold's passing. My resolve had hardened overnight into something unbreakable. I dressed in one of my better outfits, a powder blue suit. Harold had always admired Dan fix my hair carefully. Today wasn't a day for playing the doddering grandmother. Thomas arrived promptly at 9, his ancient leather briefcase bulging with documents. Behind him came his assistant, a serious young woman named Marissa, who carried a sleek laptop. "Are you certain about this course of action, Eleanor?" Thomas asked, as we settled in my dining room, which had become our impromptu office. For the next 3 hours, we worked methodically through the plan. Marissa's fingers flew over her keyboard as Thomas and I restructured my estate, signed powers of attorney, and drafted letters. By noon, the framework was in place. "This is quite the statement you're making," Thomas observed, removing his reading glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "It's not spite," I said, though part of me recognized that wasn't entirely true. "It's about consequences and protection." "The trust protects you," he agreed. "No one, not even Michael with his talk of conservatorship, can touch those assets once they're transferred." "But the other part?" He trailed off, looking at me over his glasses. "The other part is necessary," I said firmly. "Michael needs to understand that my money is not his birthright, and others need to benefit from what Harold and I built." After they left, I sat in Harold's chair, emotionally drained but resolute. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Harold's parents, chimed 1 o'clock. Its familiar sound had marked the hours of our life together. Children's birthdays, holiday gatherings, quiet evenings reading side by side. "I wish you were here," I said aloud to Harold. "You always knew how to handle difficult situations with grace." The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Michael. "Grandma," he began without preamble, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." "Have you?" I kept my voice neutral. "Yes, I realize I may have come on too strong about the retirement community. It's just that I worry about you." "That's kind of you," I said, not believing it for a second. "So I thought maybe we could compromise. What if we looked at some smaller houses or condos instead? Something more manageable, but still your own place." "Still my own place that he could promptly sell after having me declared incompetent, no doubt." "That's an interesting suggestion," I said. "Why don't you come for dinner tomorrow night? We can discuss it then." "Tomorrow?" He sounded surprised at the invitation. "Sure, That would be great. Wonderful. 6 o'clock. And Michael? I've invited Jennifer and Robert as well. I think it's time we had a family discussion about my future. A pause. Of course. That makes sense. After hanging up, I called Jennifer to update her. Mom, are you sure about this confrontation? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Michael can be manipulative. I'm counting on it, I said. I want to see him try his tactics with an audience. The next day, I spent hours preparing Harold's famous pot roast, a family favorite, for special occasions. The familiar routine of cooking soothed my nerves as I chopped vegetables and browned the meat, just as I'd done countless times over the decades. By 5:30, the house was filled with a comforting aroma of slow-cooked beef and herbs. I'd set the dining room table with my best Chinese set Harold and I had received for our 25th anniversary. 4 places, with Harold's empty chair at the head of the table, a silent reminder of his absence. Jennifer arrived first, bringing a bottle of my favorite wine and a worried expression. Mom, you look. She paused, taking in my carefully applied makeup and one of my nicer dresses. You look ready for battle. I smiled. Not battle, just truth. Robert arrived next, giving me a tight hug. Are you sure about this? He whispered. Absolutely, I assured him. Michael was precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed excessive for a family dinner. He carried a bouquet of Lily's me favorite flowers, a detail I was surprised he remembered. Grandma, he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. You look wonderful, and the house smells amazing. Thank you, Michael, I said, accepting the flowers. Harold's pot roast. I thought we should have something special for our family discussion. His smile faltered slightly at the mention of a family discussion, but he recovered quickly. Great idea. Dinner began pleasantly enough, with general conversation about Jennifer's work as a high school principal and Robert's daughter's college applications. Michael was on his best behavior, solicitous and charming, refilling my wine glass and complimenting the meal effusively. It wasn't until dessert apple pie, another family tradition, that I decided to broach the subject. Michael, I said as I served the pie, you mentioned yesterday that you thought I should consider downsizing to a smaller home. He nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. Something more manageable, but still yours. I've actually pulled some listings of nice condos in secure buildings. Places with elevators, security systems, that sort of thing. That's very thoughtful, I said. And what would happen to this house? Well, obviously we'd sell it, he said. The market is hot right now. We could probably get 2.5 million, maybe more. We, Jennifer interjected, her voice sharp. Michael glanced at her, then back to me. I just meant the family. Obviously, it would be Grandma's decision and her money. Would it? I asked quietly. Of course, he said, but his eyes shifted away from mine. Because I've heard you've been discussing conservatorship with a lawyer, suggesting that I might not be competent to manage my own affairs. The room went silent. Michael's face flushed, then paled. Who told you that? He asked, his voice tight. Does it matter? I countered. Is it true? He set down his fork carefully. I've consulted with a lawyer about options, yes, because I'm concerned about you, Grandma. Living alone, managing this big house, and all your finances. I've managed my finances since before you were born. I said evenly. Harold and I built our savings through careful planning and discipline, things you seem to lack, given your current financial troubles. Michael's head snapped up. Who says I have financial troubles? You do, Robert interjected. To anyone who'll listen, complaining about slow sales, investment losses, asking Dad for loans 3 times in the past year, while wearing $5,000 suits and driving a new luxury car, Jennifer added. Michael's face hardened. So this is an intervention? Ganging up on me because I'm concerned about Grandma's welfare? No, I said calmly. This is clarity. I wanted us all together so there would be no misunderstandings. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. Michael, I know you've been laying groundwork to challenge my competency if I don't agree to sell this house and give you access to my money. That's not. Please don't lie to me, I interrupted, my voice firm but not angry. Not in Harold's house, not at his table. Michael fell silent, his jaw working. I've made some decisions about my future, I continued. And since you're all family, you should know what they are. I explained, in calm, measured tones, the changes Thomas and I had implemented. How I'd established an irrevocable trust for most of my assets, with Jennifer and Robert as trustees. How I'd granted Thomas durable power of attorney for healthcare and financial decisions should I become incapacitated. The house, I concluded, will remain mine until I decide otherwise. Not when you decide I'm too old or incompetent to live in it, Michael. When I decide. Michael's face had grown increasingly flushed as I spoke. So you're cutting me out, because I suggested you might be safer in a more appropriate living situation. No, I said. I'm protecting myself from someone who sees me as a checkbook rather than a person. Someone who would try to have his own grandmother declared incompetent to get his hands on money he didn't earn. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. What's not fair, Jennifer said, her voice tight with anger, is trying to push Mom out of her home for your financial benefit. I never. Save it, Michael, Robert interrupted. We've all seen the text messages you sent to our cousins. About Grandma's declining capacity and how someone needs to step in before she gives everything to charity. Michael's face went white. You had no right to. They showed us, Jennifer said, because unlike you, they actually care about Mom's welfare. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Michael stared at his half-eaten pie, his knuckles white around his fork. I've made another decision as well. All three looked at me expectantly. I'm donating half of my liquid assets to establish a foundation in Harold's name, for educational scholarships for underprivileged students. Jennifer and Robert nodded, having already heard this part of the plan. Michael's head snapped up. Half? But that's millions. 3 million, to be exact, I confirmed. The foundation will be announced next month. Thomas is handling the details. You can't do that, Michael said, his voice rising. That's my money, I finished for him, to use as I see fit. But what about your family? What about your legacy? This is my legacy, I said simply. Harold and I always believed in education. This foundation will help hundreds of students who couldn't otherwise afford college. And what about me? Michael demanded, abandoning all pretense now. What about my business, my future? I looked at my grandson, this child I had held as a newborn, taught to ride a bicycle, attended every school play and graduation. This man who now saw me as nothing more than a barrier between him and wealth he felt entitled to. Your future, I said quietly, is up to you. Just as mine was up to me and Harold. We worked hard for 50 years to build what we have. We lived below our means, saved diligently, invested wisely. No one handed it to us. That's not the same, he protested. Family is supposed to help family. Is that what you were doing, helping family by trying to put me in a home and take control of my assets? He had no answer for that. The remaining assets, I continued, will still be substantial. They'll be distributed according to my will when the time comes, which I hope won't be for many years yet. But Michael, I want to be very clear. Your share is now conditional. His head snapped up. Conditional? On what? On you demonstrating the values Harold and I tried to instill in this family. Hard work, integrity, respect for others, especially your elders. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. You're punishing me for caring about your welfare. No, I said firmly. I'm holding you accountable for your actions and your character, the way Harold would have. Michael pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. You'll regret this, he said, his voice cold. When you're alone and need help, you'll wish you hadn't alienated the only person trying to look out for you. Michael! Jennifer gasped. He ignored her, focusing his anger on me. You think you're so clever, setting up trusts and foundations, but you're just a vindictive old woman who can't accept that she needs help. That's enough, Robert said, standing up. You need to leave. Now. Michael looked from Robert to Jennifer, then back to me. Fine. Enjoy your empty house and your precious independence. See how far that gets you when you fall and break your hip. With that, he stormed out, the front door slamming behind him with such force that the china cabinet rattled. In the silence that followed, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation had gone much as I'd expected, but seeing the naked entitlement and anger on my grandson's face had been painful nonetheless. Mom, I'm so sorry, Jennifer said, reaching for my hand. Don't be, I replied, squeezing her fingers. Better to know the truth now than when I'm truly vulnerable. He'll calm down, Robert said, though he didn't sound convinced. Once he realizes he's only hurting himself. I nodded, but I wasn't so sure. The look in Michael's eyes as he left hadn't been just anger, it had been calculation, and that worried me more than his outburst. After Jennifer and Robert helped clean up and left with concerned hugs and promises to check on me tomorrow, I found myself alone in the quiet house. I moved to Harold's study, a room I rarely entered since his death. His presence seemed strongest here, among his books and the photographs chronicling our life together. I sat in his leather chair, running my fingers over the worn armrests where his hands had rested for countless hours. Well, Harold, I said to the empty room, I did it. I stood up for myself, for us, for what we built together. The silence seemed to hold his approval. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Marjorie, my neighbor of 20 years. Did you decide to sell? I sat up abruptly. Absolutely not. Well, someone thinks you are. The sign says coming soon with Michael's name and company logo. I dressed quickly and walked out my front door to find exactly what Marjorie had described. A large, coming soon real estate sign with Michael's smiling face and contact information. As I stood staring at it in disbelief, a car pulled up and Michael stepped out, wearing a satisfied smile that faltered when he saw me. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, gesturing at the sign. Remove it, now. It's a public sidewalk, he countered. I have every right to advertise my services. Not for a house that isn't for sale. He shrugged. It will be, once you realize you can't manage alone. Is this how you're demonstrating the values I mentioned last night? I asked, my voice steady despite my anger. By trying to intimidate me? By lying to potential buyers that my home will be available? I'm being practical, he said, something you clearly aren't capable of anymore. The implication was clear and public. He was creating a record of my supposed incapacity, right in front of neighbors who might later be called to testify about my mental state. I turned and walked back into my house, straight to the phone. I called Thomas. He's escalating, I told him after explaining about the sign, trying to create a public perception that I'm incompetent. Thomas was silent for a moment. This changes things, he said finally. He's moved from opportunistic to aggressive. We need to respond accordingly. I agree, I said. Implement the contingency plan we discussed. All of it. Eleanor, that's the nuclear option. Are you certain? I thought of Michael's calculating eyes, his willingness to publicly undermine me, the naked greed that had replaced any semblance of familial love. "I'm certain," I said firmly. "He's made his choice. Now I'm making mine." "And Eleanor? Stay strong. This may get worse before it gets better." After hanging up, I called Jennifer and Robert to update them. Both were outraged and offered to come over immediately, but I assured them I was fine. "Just document everything," Jennifer advised. "Take photos of the sign, note the date and time. If he's trying to build a case about your competency, we need to build a stronger one about his behavior." I followed her advice, then sat down at Harold's desk and began to write a detailed account of everything that had transpired since Michael's first early morning visit, the retirement home tour, his veiled threats, the family dinner, and now, the sign. As I wrote, I felt Harold's presence more strongly than I had since his death. His practical, steady approach to problems, his unwavering moral compass, his belief that actions should have consequences. "I won't let him take what we built," I promised aloud. "Not our home, not our legacy, and certainly not our values." The grandfather clock chimed noon as I finished writing. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of the neighborhood children playing, a lawnmower, a dog barking, life continuing as it always had. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The grandmother who had always prioritized family harmony, who had overlooked slights and forgiven thoughtlessness, who had believed the best of everyone, she was gone. In her place stood a woman who would fight with every resource at her disposal to protect what was hers. Michael had awakened something in me that had been dormant since Harold's death, purpose, and a righteous anger that burned away the fog of grief that had surrounded me for 3 years. "Thank you for that, at least," I murmured, looking out at the offensive sign still standing on my lawn. "You've reminded me who I am." The phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Harrington?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Diane Lewis from the West Side Journal. I understand your house will be coming on the market soon. We're doing a feature on luxury properties and would love to include it." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Who told you my house was for sale?" "Your grandson, Michael Harrington. He said it's a significant property, one of the original homes in Oakwood Estates, and that the family has decided it's time to sell." "Did he now?" I kept my voice steady with effort. "Ms. Lewis, I'm afraid my grandson has misled you. My house is not for sale." "Not now, not soon, not ever unless I decide otherwise, and I have not decided otherwise." "Oh," she sounded flustered. "I'm sorry for the confusion. He was quite specific about—" "I'm sure he was," I interrupted. "And I'd appreciate it if you would make it equally clear in your publication that Michael Harrington is not authorized to speak about my property, which is not on the market." "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. Again, I apologize for the misunderstanding." After hanging up, I sat very still, absorbing this new development. Michael wasn't just putting up sign, she was actively marketing my home to the media, creating a public expectation that it would be sold. The line had been crossed. Whatever lingering doubts I'd had about the severity of my response vanished. Michael had declared war on my autonomy, my home, my very dignity. And I was about to show him exactly who he was dealing with. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind already racing with the day ahead. Thomas would be arriving at 9 to execute the next phase of our plan. I dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored navy suit that Harold had always said made me look formidable. My steel magnolia. He'd called me when I wore it to board meetings of the charitable foundation we'd supported for decades. I needed that strength today. The confrontation with Michael had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined when he first suggested I move to Golden Sunset Acres. This was no longer about a misguided grandson's greed. It had become a calculated attack on my autonomy, my home, and my dignity. As I fastened my pearl earrings, Harold's gift on our 40th anniversary, the doorbell rang. It was barely 7:30, too early for Thomas. Through the peephole, I saw Michael standing on my porch, impeccably dressed in a business suit, his expression set in what I recognized as his closing the deal face. The same expression he'd worn when trying to convince me to tour the retirement community. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. "Michael, it's rather early for a social call." "This isn't social, Grandma," he said, his tone businesslike. "We need to talk about what happens next." "What happens next?" I repeated, not phrasing it as a question. "Yes, I've had some interest in the house already. The sign is working." "The sign advertising a house that isn't for sale? The one you had no right to place on my property?" "I can get you top dollar if we move quickly." "Michael," I said, my voice steady, "my house is not for sale. The sign is fraudulent, and you have no authority to market my property." His expression hardened. "Grandma, be reasonable. You can't manage this place alone anymore. It's obvious to everyone in the neighborhood." "Is it? And what exactly have I failed to manage?" He glanced past me into the immaculate foyer. I'd been up since 5, cleaning with a vigor born of anger. "It's not just about the house," he said, changing tactics. "It's your overall situation. Living alone at your age isn't safe." "I've lived alone for 3 years since Harold died. Nothing has changed except your sudden interest in my assets." His jaw tightened. "That's unfair. I'm trying to help you. By placing unauthorized signs on my property, by telling the West Side Journal my house is coming on the market when it isn't, by discussing conservatorship with a lawyer. That kind of help I can do without." "You're being stubborn," he said, his voice rising slightly. "And frankly, this kind of irrational behavior only proves my point about your decision-making capacity." There it was, the threat, barely veiled. "Michael," I said calmly, "I have an appointment this morning. I suggest you leave now, remove your fraudulent sign, and reconsider your approach. Because if you continue on this path, you will not like where it leads." He stared at me, seeming genuinely surprised by my firmness. The grandmother, he remembered, the one who had indulged him, who had overlooked his self-centeredness, who had written generous checks for birthdays, and Christmas was gone. "This isn't over," he said finally. "On that," I agreed, "we are in complete accord." After he left, I called Jennifer and Robert, updating them on this latest development. Both offered again to come over, but I assured them I was handling it with Thomas's help. Thomas arrived precisely at 9, accompanied by Marissa and another young man he introduced as Craig, a forensic accountant. "Eleanor," Thomas greeted me with a gentle hug. "You look ready for battle." "I am," I confirmed, leading them to the dining room where I'd laid out coffee and pastries. "Michael was here this morning, still insisting the house is going on the market." Thomas nodded grimly. I suspected he might escalate, which is why I brought Craig. He gestured to the serious young man who was setting up a laptop. "Craig specializes in tracing financial irregularities. If Michael has been misusing clients' funds or engaging in other questionable practices, Craig will find the evidence." "Is that necessary?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "If we're implementing the full contingency plan, yes," Thomas said. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, and potentially what leverage we have." For the next 2 hours, we worked methodically. I provided all the information I had about Michael's business dealings, including the names of friends who had invested with him. Craig's fingers flew over his keyboard, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mrs. Harrington," he said finally, "based on preliminary research, there are several red flags in your grandson's business practices. Inconsistent returns reported to different investors, unusual cash withdrawals, properties listed as sold when county records show no transfer of deed. "You're saying he's running a Ponzi scheme?" Thomas asked sharply. Craig hesitated. "I can't make that determination without a full audit, but there are concerning patterns that would certainly warrant investigation by regulatory authorities." The room fell silent as we absorbed this. I had expected to find evidence of poor business decisions, perhaps excessive personal spending. But fraud? That was a different level entirely. "What does this mean for our plan?" I asked Thomas. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his no-see gesture I recognized from 50 years of friendship. "It means we proceed with extreme caution. If Michael is indeed engaged in fraudulent activities, he's not just desperate for money, he's potentially facing criminal charges. That makes him more dangerous than we anticipated." "Dangerous?" The word hung in the air. "Not physically," Thomas clarified quickly, "but certainly more aggressive in his attempts to access your assets. They may represent his only escape route from legal consequences." I thought of Michael's face that morning, the desperation barely hidden beneath his confident facade. It made a terrible kind of sense. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We continue as planned," Thomas said firmly. "But we accelerate the timeline. Marissa, contact Judge Wilson about expediting the restraining order." "Craig, dig deeper into these financial irregularities. We need solid evidence, not just suspicions." As they worked, I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment alone. The revelation about Michael's possible criminal activities had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. This wasn't just a greedy grandson trying to access his inheritance early. This was something much darker. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden Harold had tended so lovingly. The roses were blooming now, their fragrance drifting through the open window. He'd planted them the year we moved in, telling me they would grow more beautiful with each passing season, just like our marriage. "Oh, Harold," I whispered, "what would you do?" The answer came immediately, as clear as if he'd spoken aloud. Harold would protect what we'd built. He would stand firm against anyone who threatened Itivan family. Especially family who should know better. Strengthened by this certainty, I returned to the dining room where Thomas was on the phone, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "No, that's completely unacceptable," he was saying. "Mrs. Harrington has made no such decision." "Yes, I understand, but as her attorney of record, I can assure you, no, a grandson has no legal authority in this matter without specific documentation, which does not exist." He hung up, his expression grim. "What is it?" I asked, though I already suspected. "Michael has contacted Prestige Realty. He told them you've decided to sell the house and that he's handling the arrangements because you're not well enough to manage the details. They were calling to schedule a time to photograph the property." A cold fury washed over me. "He's gone too far." "Yes," Thomas agreed. "And we need to respond decisively. Craig has found enough evidence of financial irregularities to justify our next steps." "Which are?" "First, the restraining order Judge Wilson has agreed to hear us this afternoon. Second, formal notifications to all relevant parties that Michael has no authority to act on your behalf. And third," he paused, "a meeting with the district attorney's office to discuss Craig's findings." "The district attorney?" I echoed. "That would mean criminal charges." "Potentially, yes, if the evidence supports it." I sat down heavily, the weight of this decision pressing on me. Criminal charges against my own grandson, Harold's flesh and blood. "Is there no other way?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Thomas sat beside me, his aged hand covering mine. "Eleanor, I've known you and Harold for 50 years. I know this isn't what you want, but Michael has forced this confrontation. He's attempting to defraud you, possibly others as well. If we don't stop him now, decisively, He'll continue until he succeeds, sir. Until he's stopped by authorities anyway. Perhaps with even more serious consequences. I nodded slowly. You're right. Let's proceed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Thomas and I appeared before Judge Wilson, a stern woman in her 60s who listened carefully to our evidence of Michael's attempts to sell my house without authorization, his discussions about conservatorship, and his misrepresentations to third parties about my mental capacity. Mrs. Harrington, the judge addressed me directly. Do you understand the implications of a restraining order against your grandson? I do, Your Honor, I replied steadily. It's not a step I take lightly, but Michael's actions have left me no choice. She nodded, studying me over her reading glasses. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting a temporary restraining order prohibiting Michael Harrington from coming within 100 yards of your person or property, or contacting you directly. This order will remain in effect until the hearing for a permanent order, scheduled for 2 weeks from today. As we left the courthouse, Thomas squeezed my arm gently. You did well, Eleanor. The judge was impressed by your clarity and resolve. I don't feel impressive, I admitted. I feel sad and angry and very, very tired. That's understandable. This isn't how anyone wants to spend their golden years fighting off predatory family members. The word predatory hung in the air between us. Was that what Michael had become? A predator, seeing me as vulnerable prey? By the time Thomas dropped me at home, it was nearly 6 in the evening. The unauthorized "coming soon" sign had been removed from my lawn, presumably by Michael after our morning confrontation. In its place was a simple "no trespassing" sign that Thomas had arranged to have installed. Jennifer called as I was making a cup of tea. Mom, Robert and I just heard from Thomas. A restraining order? Is that really necessary? I'm afraid so, I said, explaining the morning's revelations about Michael's possible financial fraud. Jennifer was silent for a long moment. I knew he was in some kind of trouble, but this is beyond anything I imagined. Does Aunt Patricia know? About her son? Patricia was Harold's younger sister, Michael's mother. She'd been widowed young and had struggled to raise Michael alone. Perhaps that explained some of his sense of entitlement. Patricia had compensated for the absence of his father by indulging him materially. Not yet, I said. Thomas thought we should wait until we have more concrete evidence before approaching her. She'll be devastated, Jennifer said softly. First to learn what Michael's been doing to you, and now this potential criminal activity. I know, I sighed. That's the hardest part of all this, knowing how it will hurt Patricia. After hanging up, I sat in Harold's chair, too exhausted to even think about dinner. The events of the day had drained me completely. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, the doorbell was ringing insistently. I glanced at the clock, nearly 9. Who would be visiting at this hour? Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. Patricia stood on my porch, her face tight with anger. I opened the door, bracing myself. Patricia, this is unexpected. How could you? She demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. A restraining order against your own grandson. Have you lost your mind? I assure you, I haven't, I said, closing the door, though Michael has been working hard to convince everyone otherwise. He told me everything, Patricia said, pacing my living room. How you've become paranoid, accusing him of trying to steal your house. How you've turned Jennifer and Robert against him. And now this a restraining order? Based on what? That he suggested you might be safer in a retirement community? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Patricia was operating on limited information, Michael's version of events. I know my son would never try to harm his grandmother, she said, but she sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid. Calmly, methodically, I laid out the facts. Michael's early morning visit and suggestion of Golden Sunset Acres. His discussions with a lawyer about conservatorship. The unauthorized coming soon sign. His contacts with realtors and the media presenting himself as authorized to sell my house. Patricia's face paled as I spoke. Her anger gradually replaced by confusion and then dismay. "But why?" she asked finally. "Why would he do these things?" "Money," I said simply. "He's in financial trouble, Patricia. Serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal about Craig's findings. "That's still being determined, but it appears to involve his real estate business." Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God, the investors, all those people who trusted him with their money. "You know about that?" She nodded miserably. "He's been raising money from everyone, friends, family, clients, promising extraordinary returns on property investments. I gave him most of my savings." My heart sank. "How much, Patricia?" 200,000, she whispered. "Almost everything I had after Edward died. Michael said it was guaranteed that he had buyers lined up for properties that would double in value within a year." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry. When did you invest?" 3 years ago." Her voice was barely audible. "I've been asking about returns for the past year, but he always has an excuse. Closing delays, permit issues." I never suspected that he might be running a Ponzi scheme. Patricia flinched at the words. "Is that what you think? That my son is a criminal?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Thomas has brought in a forensic accountant to examine the evidence, but the preliminary findings are concerning." She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need to talk to Michael, to hear his explanation." "Patricia, he's under a restraining order. He can't come here tonight." "Is that wise? If he's in legal trouble, confronting him might just make things worse." She straightened her shoulders, and in that moment, I saw Harold's determination in his sister's face. "He's my son. I need to know the truth, all of it." After Patricia left, I called Thomas despite the late hour. He answered on the second ring, sounding fully awake. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" I explained Patricia's visit and her revelation about investing her savings with Michael. "This confirms our suspicions," Thomas said grimly. "If he's taken money from his own mother." Craig has identified at least 12 other investors so far, with combined investments of over $3 million. None have received the promised returns. What happens now? Now we move to protect you and potentially these other victims. I've scheduled a meeting with the district attorney for tomorrow morning. With your permission, I'd like to bring Patricia. Her testimony could be crucial. If she's willing, I agreed. "But Thomas, this will destroy her. Michael is all she has." "I know," he said softly. "But she deserves the truth, and a chance to recover whatever assets might remain." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of Harold's study, the weight of the day pressing down on me. This had gone so far beyond what I'd anticipated when I first noticed Michael's predatory interest in my home. Now, it wasn't just about protecting my assets, it was about exposing what appeared to be a criminal enterprise that had victimized multiple people, including Michael's own mother. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10, its familiar sound a reminder of simpler times. Times when family meant protection and love, not threat and exploitation. "Harold," I whispered to the empty room, "I need your strength now more than ever." As if in answer, my gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, the two of us on our 50th anniversary, surrounded by family. Michael stood at the edge of the group, his smile not quite reaching his eyes even then. Had the seeds of this betrayal already been planted? Had we missed the signs of who he was becoming? The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. It was Patricia, her voice shaking. Eleanor, I'm at Michael's apartment. He's not here, but there are boxes everywhere, packed boxes, and his passport is gone from the drawer where he always keeps it. A cold dread settled in my stomach. He's running. I found financial documents, statements showing investor funds being transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. My name is on the list. So is yours. Mine? I echoed in confusion. I never invested with Michael. It's dated last month. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. I never signed any such document. It looks like your signature, Patricia said. But if you didn't sign it... He forged it, I finished, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. My God, Patricia, how far was he willing to go? The answer was clear, as far as necessary to get what he wanted. My house, my money, my very identity, forged on a document that would have given him complete control over my financial life. I'm calling the police, Patricia said, her voice suddenly firm. And then I'm calling Thomas. This ends tonight. As I hung up the phone, a strange calm settled over me. The final piece had fallen into place. Michael hadn't just been opportunistic or greedy, had been methodically criminal, willing to forge documents, defraud investors, and steal from his own family. The confrontation I had been building toward wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about justice for Patricia, for the other investors, and for me. For the trust that had been violated, the family bonds that had been betrayed, and the legacy that Harold and I had built with 50 years of honest work. Tomorrow would bring police reports, meetings with the district attorney, and the formal beginning of legal proceedings that would likely send my grandson to prison. It would be painful, public, and permanent. But tonight, in the quiet of Harold's study, surrounded by the memories of our life together, I made my peace with what had to be done. Michael had made his choices. Now, he would face the consequences. And I would be the one to ensure that happened. Dawn broke with a clarity that seemed almost deliberate, as if the universe itself wanted to illuminate the day ahead. I had barely slept, my mind racing with the revelations of the previous night. Michael's forgery, the Cayman Islands account, Patricia's discovery of the packed boxes and missing passport, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. I dressed with particular care, choosing a suit Harold had always admired, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, conservative yet unmistakably powerful. The kind of outfit I'd worn to board meetings in my younger days, when Harold and I had served together on various charitable foundations. I paired it with his mother's pearls, a tangible connection to the family legacy that Michael had so casually attempted to steal. Thomas arrived precisely at 8, his weathered face grave. Patricia called me last night, he said as I ushered him into the living room. She's meeting us at the district attorney's office. The police are already looking for Michael. Do they think he's fled the country? I asked, the question that had kept me awake most of the night. It's possible, Thomas admitted, but they've flagged his passport. If he tries to use it, they'll be notified. And the forged investment document with my signature? Patricia brought it to the police. They're treating it as evidence of attempted fraud, along with the other investor documents she found. I nodded, absorbing this. How is she? Thomas sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 82 years. Devastated, angry, but remarkably resolute. She spent most of the night contacting the other investors on the list she found, warning them. That couldn't have been easy, I murmured, thinking of the humiliation Patricia must have felt, admitting that her son had defrauded her and others. No, Thomas agreed. But she said something that struck me. She said, Eleanor stood up to him to protect what Harold built. I can do no less. A lump formed in my throat. Patricia had always been the gentler of the Harrington siblings, more conciliatory than Harold's straightforward approach. But in this crisis, She was showing the same steel spine that had characterized her brother. "We should go," I said, gathering my purse. "I don't want to keep the district attorney waiting." The ride downtown passed in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. I watched the familiar neighborhoods slip by, places where Harold and I had built our life together. The elementary school where our children had learned to read, the park where we'd pushed grandchildren on swings, the church where we'd renewed our vows on our 50th anniversary. So many memories, so much history, all of it, threatened by Michael's greed. The district attorney's office was housed in a modern building of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the historic courthouse next door. Patricia was already waiting in the lobby, her face pale but composed. She embraced me tightly when she saw me. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never imagined he could do something like this." "Neither did I assured her, returning the embrace. "But we'll face it together." District Attorney Caroline Winters was a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for prosecuting white-collar crime with particular vigor. She ushered us into a conference room where two other people waited, a police detective introduced as Sergeant Martinez and a woman from the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Mrs. Harrington, Mrs. Lawson," Caroline addressed Patricia and me. "Thank you for coming in. I understand this is an extremely difficult situation, involving as it does a family member." "Yes," I said simply, "but that doesn't change the facts." "Indeed," she agreed. "And the facts, as they're emerging, are quite serious. Based on the documents Mrs. Lawson provided last night and our preliminary investigation, we believe Michael Harrington has been operating a Ponzi scheme for approximately 3 years, defrauding investors of at least $4 million. The amount took my breath away. $4 million? At minimum, the SEC representative confirmed. We're still identifying victims and tracing fund movements. A significant portion appears to have been transferred offshore, but we're working with international authorities to freeze those accounts." "And the forgery?" I asked. "The document with my signature?" Sergeant Martinez slid a paper across the tabla copy of what appeared to be an investment agreement with my name signed at the bottom. "This purports to be an authorization for Mr. Harrington to invest $500,000 on your behalf. Did you sign this document, Mrs. Harrington?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I never authorized Michael to invest any money for me, let alone $500,000. "The signature is a reasonable facsimile of yours," the detective noted, "but our document examiner has already identified it as a forgery." This adds another charge to the growing list. Forgery, attempted fraud, securities fraud, wire fraud for the offshore transfers. "What happens now?" Patricia asked, her voice steady despite the devastating inventory of her son's crimes. "We've issued an arrest warrant," Caroline explained. "All airports and border crossings have been alerted. If he's still in the country, we'll find him." "And if he's not?" I asked the question Patricia seemed unable to voice. "Then it becomes more complicated, but not impossible. We have extradition treaties with most countries. The Cayman Islands has become much more cooperative in recent years regarding financial crimes." The meeting continued for another hour as we provided statements about Michael's recent behavior, his attempts to gain control of my assets, and Patricia's discovery of the documents and packed apartment. By the time we emerged from the building, it was nearly noon, and I felt utterly drained. "Eleanor," Patricia said as Thomas went to bring the car around, "I want you to know that whatever happens with Michael, I support what you're doing. He betrayed everything Harold and Edward believed in: honesty, integrity, family loyalty." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "And I want to be there," she continued. "When you announce the foundation, Harold would be so proud of what you're doing with the money you built together." The Harold Harrington Educational Foundation. In all the chaos of the past days, I'd almost forgotten that part of my plan was still moving forward. $3 million to provide scholarships for underprivileged students, the legacy Harold and I had always intended to leave, now accelerated by Michael's actions. The announcement is scheduled for next week, I told her. I'd be honored to have you there. Thomas drove us back to my house, where Jennifer and Robert were waiting, their faces tight with concern. We heard from the police, Jennifer said as soon as we entered. They came by this morning looking for information about Michael's usual haunts, friends who might be hiding him. Any leads? Thomas asked. Robert shook his head. Nothing solid, but they seem to think he's still in the country. Something about his credit card being used at a hotel in Chicago last night. A small hope kindled within me. If Michael hadn't managed to flee abroad, there was a better chance of recovering the stolen funds and of him facing justice for his crimes. The next few days passed in a blur of police interviews, meetings with Thomas and the forensic accountant, and preparations for the foundation announcement. Each day brought new revelations about the extent of Michael's fraud, the number of victims continuing to grow as more investors came forward. And then, 5 days after Patricia's discovery of the empty apartment, the call came. I was in the garden, tending to Harold's roses, when Jennifer rushed outside, her face flushed with excitement. Mom, the police just called. They've arrested Michael. I straightened slowly, my arthritic joints protesting the sudden movement. Where? At O'Hare Airport in Chicago. He was trying to board a flight to Mexico using a fake passport. They caught him at the gate. A wave of emotions washed over me: relief, vindication, and a profound sadness that it had come to this. My grandson in handcuffs, facing years in prison for crimes that had devastated dozens of people, including his own mother. Have they told Patricia? I asked. Jennifer nodded. She's on her way here now. She asked if you'd be willing to go with her to Chicago when they transfer him back for arraignment. Of course, I said without hesitation. She shouldn't face that alone. 2 days later, Patricia and I sat in the back of a courtroom in downtown Chicago, watching as Michael was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, his confident facade crumbled, his eyes darting nervously around the room until they landed on us. The shock on his face when he saw us sitting together was almost worth the pain of the moment. He had clearly expected his mother to side with him, to believe whatever lies he told about me and my vindictiveness. Instead, she sat beside me, her spine straight, her gaze unflinching as she faced the son who had betrayed her trust so completely. The hearing was brief, a formal reading of the charges, a plea of not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence, and a denial of bail given the flight risk Michael clearly presented. As he was led away, he looked back once, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. Do you think he's sorry? Patricia asked, as we left the courthouse. Truly sorry, I mean, not just sorry he got caught. I considered the question carefully. I don't know. I hope so. For his sake, more than ours. The media was waiting outside, a small cluster of reporters who had picked up on the story of a prominent real estate agent charged with running a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Patricia and I had agreed in advance not to comment, but as we walked toward the car, a reporter called out a question that stopped me in my tracks. Mrs. Harrington, how does it feel to know your grandson tried to have you declared incompetent to steal your fortune? I turned slowly, facing the young woman who had shouted the question. The other reporters fell silent, sensing a potential moment. It feels, I said carefully, like a profound betrayal, not just of me, but of every value my late husband and I tried to instill in our family. But what Michael failed to understand is that the strength that built our fortune didn't diminish with age. If anything, 78 years of life experience, made me better equipped to recognize and stand against his manipulation. A murmur ran through the small crowd. Another reporter called out, "Do you think his actions were motivated by your decision to donate half your assets to charity?" "Michael's actions began before that decision was made," I corrected. "In fact, his attempts to access my assets accelerated my plans for the Harold Harrington Educational Foundation, which will be formally announced next week. My husband and I always intended to leave a legacy that would help others. Michael simply hastened the timeline." "Mrs. Harrington," a third reporter asked, "what would you say to other elderly individuals who might be facing similar pressure from family members?" I hadn't planned to make a statement, but standing there in the autumn sunlight, I suddenly felt the weight of responsibility, not just for my own situation, but for others who might be experiencing the same vulnerability. "I would say this," I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. "Age brings wisdom, not weakness. Trust that wisdom. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone, family included, convince you that you're incapable of managing your own affairs simply because you've reached a certain age. And remember that your life's work, your home, your savings, these belong to you, not to children or grandchildren who may feel entitled to them before you're gone." Patricia squeezed my arm, a silent show of support as Thomas finally managed to usher us through the crowd to the waiting car. "That was quite a statement," he observed as we pulled away from the curb. "It wasn't planned," I admitted, "but it needed to be said." "It certainly did," Patricia agreed. "And it might help others who are being pressured the way Michael pressured you." The drive back was long, giving me time to reflect on everything that had happened since that first early morning visit when Michael suggested I consider Golden Sunset Acres, the attempted manipulation, the escalating pressure, the fraudulent sign on my lawn, the forged documents, each step revealing more clearly the depth of his entitlement and moral corruption. And yet, despite everything, a small part of me still grieved for the grandson I had once known, the little boy who had sat on Harold's knee listening to stories, the teenager who had helped me plant tulip bulbs one crisp autumn afternoon, the young man who had danced with me at his college graduation party. Where had that person gone? Or had I simply failed to see who he truly was all along? The foundation announcement took place the following week in the atrium of the city's main library, a fitting venue for an educational initiative. Jennifer and Robert stood beside me as I unveiled the details of the Harold Harrington Educational Foundation, which would provide full scholarships to 50 underprivileged students each year. My husband believed that education was the great equalizer, I told the assembled crowd, which included media, educators, and community leaders. That with the right opportunities, anyone could build a meaningful life and contribute to society. This foundation honors that belief and ensures that his values will continue to make a difference for generations to come. The applause was heartfelt, the questions thoughtful. No one mentioned Michael directly, though his absence hung in the air, the unspoken counterpoint to the legacy of integrity and generosity we were celebrating. Afterward, as the crowd mingled over refreshments, a young reporter approached me. "Mrs. Harrington, your story has resonated with many people, especially older Americans who feel vulnerable to financial exploitation. Would you be willing to speak at a community forum on elder rights next month?" I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I think I would. If my experience can help others protect themselves, some good will have come from it." In the weeks that followed, as Michael's case moved through the legal system and more details of his fraud emerged, I found myself increasingly involved in advocacy for elder rights. What had begun as a personal battle to protect my own autonomy and assets had evolved into something larger, a platform to speak for those whose voices, like mine, were too often dismissed due to age. Thomas helped me establish a second foundation, focused specifically on providing legal resources to elderly individuals facing exploitation or coercion. We named it the Eleanor and Harold Harrington Dignity Project. Harold would be proud, Thomas told me as we finalized the paperwork. Not just of the foundations, but of how you've stood your ground. How you've turned this painful experience into something that will help others. I hope so, I said, thinking of my husband's unwavering moral compass. I've tried to do what he would have done. Michael eventually accepted a plea deal, admitting to multiple counts of fraud and forgery in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years. The offshore accounts were frozen and eventually repatriated, allowing for partial restitution to his victims, including Patricia. I visited him once before he began serving his sentence, a difficult meeting in a sterile visitation room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. "Why, Michael?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. "We would have helped you if you were in financial trouble. You didn't have to resort to fraud." He couldn't meet my eyes. "It started small," he said finally. "Just borrowing from one investor to pay another when a deal fell through. Then it snowballed. And then I couldn't stop, couldn't admit what I'd done. And targeting me? Trying to take my home? Forging my signature?" His jaw tightened. "You had so much. Just sitting there in that big house alone. It seemed wasteful." "It wasn't yours to waste," I said quietly, "or to take." "I know that now," he admitted. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, for all of it." I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. There was remorse there, I thought, but also a lingering sense of entitlement that might never fully disappear. "I hope you use this time to reflect," I said finally, "to become someone Harold would have been proud of." As I rose to leave, he called after me. "The foundations, they're a good thing. Grandpa would have liked that." It was the closest thing to genuine approval I'd heard from him in years. 1 year to the day after Michael's first suggestion that I consider Golden Sunset Acres, I stood in my garden, surrounded by Harold's roses in full bloom. The house behind Muirhome of 48 years now stood solid and welcoming, its windows gleaming in the morning sun. Jennifer and Robert were coming for dinner, along with their spouses and children. Patricia would be there too, slowly rebuilding her life after the financial and emotional devastation Michael had wrought. We had grown closer through the ordeal, united by our shared pain and determination to move forward with integrity. The previous week, I had given the keynote address at a national conference on elder rights, sharing my story with hundreds of advocates, attorneys, and older Americans. Age, I had told them, is not synonymous with incapacity. Gray hair does not signify diminished judgment. And the wealth we have built through decades of work and wise stewardship is ours to direct as we see fit. The applause had been thunderous, but more meaningful were the conversations afterward. Dozens of older individuals sharing similar stories of pressure from family members, of subtle and not so subtle attempts to control their assets or decisions. "You gave me courage," one woman in her 80s had told me, gripping my hands in hers. "I've been afraid to say no to my son who's been pressuring me to sell my farm. After hearing you speak, I called my lawyer this morning." Such moments made the pain of the past year worthwhile. Michael's betrayal had cost me much peace of mind, trust, the comfortable assumption that family would always act in my best interest. But it had also given me an unexpected final chapter, a purpose, a platform, and the deep satisfaction of helping others stand firm against exploitation. As I cut roses for the dinner table, I spoke aloud to Harold, a habit I'd never abandoned in the 4 years since his passing. "Well, my love, this isn't how we plan to spend our golden years, is it? But perhaps it's the path we were meant to take." The breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the sweet scent of roses. In that moment, I felt Harold's presence more strongly than I had in Yersh's strength, his integrity, his unwavering support. "The foundations are doing well," I continued, selecting a particularly perfect bloom. 10 students already enrolled for the fall semester with full scholarships. And the Dignity Project has taken on 15 cases of elder exploitation, with Thomas supervising a team of young attorneys who work pro bono. I gathered the roses in my arms, their thorns carefully avoided, their fragrance enveloping me. Michael writes occasionally from prison, taking courses, he says, planning for a fresh start when he's released. I want to believe him, Harold. I do. But trust, once broken, is so hard to rebuild. Inside the house, I arranged the roses in Harold's favorite crystal vase, placing it at the center of the dining table where our family would gather in a few hours. The table where, a year ago, Michael had revealed the full extent of his entitlement and greed. The table where, tonight, we would celebrate resilience, integrity, and the power of standing firm in one's convictions. The doorbell rang, Jennifer arriving early to help with dinner preparations, as she often did now. Our relationship had deepened through the crisis, mother and daughter becoming true allies. As I moved to answer the door, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman who looked back at me was not the uncertain widow who had greeted Michael that early morning a year ago. This woman stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her purpose evident in the set of her shoulders and the tilt of her chin. "Thank you, Michael," I whispered, surprising myself with the words, "for showing me my own strength." Then I opened the door to welcome my daughter, ready to embrace whatever the next chapter might bring.